Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, way back, to the sun-drenched banks of the Nile, to a world where life and death danced in a much more immediate, primal rhythm. Imagine the dry, dusty air, the scent of the river, the murmur of a bustling village. You're there, feeling the heat on your skin, perhaps a gentle breeze stirring the linen of your simple tunic. Now, picture yourself as an expectant mother in this ancient land. You're not scrolling through baby registries or debating stroller models. No, your concerns are far more fundamental, far more horrifying. Because the truth about childbirth in ancient Egypt, well, let's just say you probably wouldn't survive it. Seriously, it was a perilous journey, one that tested the very limits of human endurance. And frankly, a journey that makes our modern birthing experiences look like a luxury spa day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening in, let me know your location and what time it is for you right now in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've noticed the subtle changes in your body? The fatigue, the missed moon cycles. There's a quiet buzz of anticipation, tinged with a deep, ancestral fear. But how do you, an ancient Egyptian woman, confirm what you suspect? Forget the little pink lines on a plastic stick. Their methods were inventive. One mainstream historical fact about ancient Egyptian pregnancy tests involves barley and wheat. You would urinate on separate bags of these grains over several days. If the barley sprouted, it was thought to indicate a male child. If the wheat sprouted, a female. If neither sprouted, well, you weren't pregnant. Now, historians still argue whether this had any scientific basis, but some modern studies have surprisingly shown that the urine of pregnant women can sometimes accelerate the growth of certain seeds due to hormone levels. So, perhaps there was a tiny, accidental kernel of truth in their agricultural approach to diagnostics. Pun absolutely intended. But imagine the suspense, waiting for your little plant nursery to give you the news. It sounds less like a medical test and more like a very slow, slightly damp gardening project. And what if you just had a really enthusiastic bladder? The accuracy, as you can probably guess, was less than stellar. Beyond the grain test, there were other, even more peculiar methods. A quirky or fringe tidbit involved onions. Seriously, a woman might insert an onion or a clove of garlic into her vagina overnight. If her breath smelled of the onion or garlic the next morning, she was considered pregnant. The logic here was that if she wasn't pregnant, her uterus would be open enough for the smell to travel through her body to her mouth. If she was pregnant, the uterus would be closed, preventing the odor from escaping. It sounds less like a medical diagnosis and more like a very pungent parlor trick. You can almost hear the ancient Egyptian husband whispering, "Darling, have you been eating garlic again?" Or the things they did before readily available Google searches. Right. You just have to wonder about the poor person who first thought, I wonder what happens if I stick a garlic clove there. Genius. Or just really, really bored. The desperation for knowledge about one's own body in an era devoid of scientific understanding led to some truly wild experiments. And this wasn't just about curiosity, it was about survival, about preparing for the immense challenge ahead. Because once confirmed, the journey to motherhood in ancient Egypt was just beginning, and it was anything but easy. Once your pregnancy was, by whatever strange method, confirmed, the focus immediately shifted to preparation. This wasn't just about gathering supplies, it was about creating a sacred space, both physically and spiritually, for the momentous event to come. You see, the birthing environment in ancient Egypt wasn't just a room. It was a carefully curated sanctuary. Designed to protect both mother and child from the myriad seen and unseen dangers, you wouldn't be scheduling a hospital tour instead. You'd be meticulously arranging specific items and invoking powerful forces. One mainstream historical fact about these preparations is the use of special birthing houses or pavilions. These weren't always permanent structures, especially for the common folk. Often, a temporary structure, sometimes made of reeds or mud brick, would be set up near the family home for wealthier families or royalty. There might be dedicated birthing chambers within their estates, adorned with protective symbols. These spaces were considered liminal, existing between the everyday world and the spiritual realm, making them particularly vulnerable and requiring extra precautions. Think of it as ancient Egyptian feng shui, but with a lot more emphasis on warding off evil spirits and less on promoting wealth and good fortune. Though I suppose a healthy baby was the ultimate good fortune. Now, a quirky or fringe tidbit, these birthing spaces were often adorned with specific plants and symbols, believed to possess protective or fertility-enhancing properties. For instance, specific types of papyrus or lotus flowers might be placed around the area. These weren't just for decoration. They were believed to embody the life-giving forces of the Nile and provide a natural barrier against malevolent entities. You might even find images of Bez, the dwarf god of childbirth, music, and merriment, painted on the walls or carved into small amulets. He was depicted as rather fierce, sticking out his tongue, which was meant to scare away evil spirits. Imagine giving birth while a rather grumpy-looking dwarf god glares at you from the wall. It might not be the most aesthetically pleasing birthing buddy. But hey, if it worked, you weren't complaining. Historians still argue whether the primary function of these plants was purely symbolic, or if there was an underlying, perhaps unrecorded, herbal medicinal use that has since been lost to time. The environment was also cleansed ritually. You wouldn't just sweep the floor, you might burn incense to purify the air and drive away negative energies. This smoke, often from resins like frankincense or myrrh, served a dual purpose, a spiritual cleansing and perhaps a very early form of air freshener in a world that could get quite odorous. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen? Yeah, personal hygiene was different. The idea was to create a space that was not only physically clean, but also spiritually fortified, a haven where life could safely emerge. Water was also profoundly important. Large jars of fresh Nile water would be brought into the birthing space, not just for drinking and washing, but also for ritual purposes. Water was the essence of life in Egypt, symbolizing creation and renewal, and its presence was believed to invite positive forces and ease the delivery. Imagine the soothing sound of water being poured, a small comfort in what was undoubtedly a terrifying experience. You might also prepare a special birthing stool or a pile of clean sand. As upright or squatting positions were favored for delivery, a practice that many modern birthing experts advocate for today. So, some things, it seems, come full circle, though I doubt anyone today is giving birth over a pile of sand, unless they're really committed to the natural experience. The preparation was exhaustive, a blend of the practical and the deeply spiritual, reflecting the profound significance and inherent dangers of bringing new life into the ancient world. With the birthing space prepared, the next crucial step in ancient Egyptian childbirth was to invoke the divine. You wouldn't just be relying on earthly assistance, you'd be enlisting a whole pantheon of powerful deities, each with a specific role in protecting mother and child. These weren't just abstract concepts. They were living forces, deeply interwoven into the daily fabric of their lives. Especially during a time of such vulnerability, one mainstream historical fact is the prominence of Taweret, the hippopotamus goddess. As a primary protector of childbirth and fertility, she's often depicted with the head of a hippopotamus, the limbs of a lion, and the back and tail of a crocodile, quite the formidable figure. Her fierce appearance wasn't meant to be frightening to humans, but rather to scare away evil spirits and demons that might try to harm the pregnant woman, or her baby. Imagine her, standing guard, a visual representation of raw, protective power. You'd find her image on amulets, headrests, and even on the walls of homes, a constant reminder of her benevolent, albeit intimidating, presence. She was essentially the ancient Egyptian version of a very large, very grumpy, but ultimately very loving security guard for your reproductive journey. A quirky or fringe tidbit is the role of Bess, whom we mentioned briefly before, while Tuaret was the fierce protector. Bess was more the jovial, albeit still rather grotesque, entertainer and guardian. He was typically depicted as a dwarf with a large head, bowed legs, and a protruding tongue, sometimes wearing a lion's mane or tail. But don't let his appearance fool you. Bess was intensely popular, particularly among women, as a protector of households, mothers, and children. He was also associated with music, dance, and revelry. So, in the birthing chamber, not only would you have Tauret's stern gaze, but you might also have images of Bess dancing or playing an instrument, his purpose being to lighten the mood, distract from pain, and scare off evil with his comical yet ferocious demeanor. Historians still argue whether Bess's appearance was intended to be inherently a patriarchaic, evil averting through ugliness, or if his perceived ugliness was simply a convention of artistic representation for a protective, chthonic deity. Either way, he was a welcome sight. You would also invoke other deities. Isis, the great mother goddess, was a frequent recipient of prayers for safe delivery, as she represented maternal love and protection. Hathor, often depicted as a cow or a woman with cow horns, was another important goddess of motherhood, joy, and women. You might offer small votive figures or even just a simple prayer, perhaps a quiet whisper to the universe, asking for their aid. These were not mere formalities for the ancient Egyptians. These invocations were critical to the outcome. You truly believed that the gods and goddesses could intervene, that their favor could turn the tide between life and death. It was a deeply spiritual experience, woven into the very fabric of their understanding of the world. You're not just relying on human hands, you're relying on cosmic powers, hoping that the divine forces align to bring your child safely into the world. It's a lot of pressure on the gods, isn't it? But then again, they had a lot of practice, with the deities invoked and the sacred space prepared. The moment of truth approached. But who would guide you through this perilous journey in ancient Egypt? You wouldn't be seeing a doctor with a degree framed on the wall. Instead, you'd be relying on the expertise of women, often older and experienced, who held the crucial role of midwives. Their skills were honed through generations of practice, passed down orally, often within families or communities. One mainstream historical fact is that midwives were highly respected figures in ancient Egyptian society. They weren't formally trained in the way modern doctors are, but their practical knowledge of birthing positions, natural remedies, and comforting techniques was invaluable. They understood the rhythm of labor, the subtle cues of the body, and the importance of encouragement. Think of them as the original birth doulas, but with a much higher stakes scenario. They were the reassuring presence, the steady hand, and the voice of calm amidst the storm. They were the ones who had seen it all, countless times over, in an era where all often included tragic outcomes. A quirky or fringe tidbit about ancient Egyptian midwives is that they often employed various techniques to aid delivery, some of which seem quite unusual to us today. For instance, they might use charms or amulets that had been specially prepared and blessed, placing them on or near the laboring woman. These weren't just decorative, they were believed to channel divine power and ward off evil spirits that might try to interfere with the birth. You might even find depictions of midwives assisting women while holding a magic wand or stick, perhaps for rhythmic tapping or to symbolically open the birthing passage. While we might scoff at the magic wand today, it speaks to the blend of practical assistance and spiritual belief that define their approach. Historians still argue whether some of these ritualistic practices had any psychosomatic effect, helping to calm the mother and indirectly aid the birthing process through belief and placebo. The midwife's role extended beyond just the physical act of delivery. She was also responsible for offering emotional support, whispering prayers, and performing various rituals to ensure a safe outcome. She would guide the woman into squatting or kneeling positions, often utilizing the birthing bricks or a birthing stool, which were common practice. These positions, by the way, are now recognized as being far more physiologically efficient for childbirth than lying flat on one's back, which became standard practice much later in Western medicine. So, in some ways, the ancient Egyptians were ahead of their time. Even if they were also using magic wands, the relationship between the laboring woman and her midwife was one of profound trust. You would have known this woman, probably from your community, perhaps even your own mother or grandmother. She was not a stranger, but a familiar, comforting presence who had guided countless women through this terrifying, beautiful threshold. Her hands were experienced, her voice steady, her knowledge deeply ingrained in the traditions of her people, and in a world where medical intervention was virtually non-existent. Her presence, her wisdom, and her quiet strength were often the only difference between life and death for both you and your baby. It really puts the delivery service concept in a whole new, ancient light, doesn't it? As labor intensified, the ancient Egyptian woman faced an ordeal unimaginable to most of us today. The concept of modern pain relief, epidurals, gas and air, even simple painkillers was, of course, entirely absent. You were left to the raw, visceral experience of childbirth, your body working in concert with forces both natural and spiritual, yet even without pharmaceuticals. Attempts were made to ease the suffering, often through a fascinating blend of practical remedies and ritualistic practices. One mainstream historical fact is that ancient Egyptians used various herbal concoctions to try and alleviate pain during labor. While specific recipes are scarce and often debated by modern scholars due to the interpretive nature of ancient texts, ingredients like opium poppies, mandrake, and cannabis are known to have been used for their analgesic properties in other contexts. It's plausible, therefore, that diluted forms or extracts of these plants might have been administered. Imagine a gritty, earthy liquid, perhaps bitter to the taste, offered to you by the midwife. You'd gulp it down, desperate for any flicker of relief, hoping it would dull the sharp edges of the contractions, even if just for a moment. This wasn't about completely eliminating pain, but about taking the edge off, providing a brief respite in what could be hours or even days of intense suffering. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves the use of rhythmic chanting, drumming, or specific incantations during labor. While we don't have detailed playlists from ancient Egypt, archaeological findings and texts suggest that music and ritual sounds played a significant role in healing and spiritual practices. It's highly probable that midwives or family members would engage in rhythmic vocalizations or play simple instruments to create a soothing, perhaps hypnotic, atmosphere. This wasn't just for spiritual comfort. The rhythmic sounds could potentially distract the laboring woman from her pain, help her focus her breathing, and even encourage a certain mental state conducive to labor. Historians still argue whether these auditory rituals were primarily spiritual in intent, aiming to invite benevolent deities, or if there was an intuitive understanding of their psychological effects on pain perception. Maybe it was the ancient equivalent of putting on your favorite calming playlist, only with more drums and less Spotify, beyond herbs and sounds. Physical comfort was also considered. While they lacked heating pads or massage chairs, the midwife might use warm water compresses or gentle pressure on the lower back. Techniques still employed today, the birthing positions themselves, often squatting or kneeling, were chosen because they utilized gravity and opened the pelvis. making the process potentially less arduous than lying flat. You might lean against a support, perhaps the birthing bricks, or be supported by the midwife or a female relative. But make no mistake, despite these efforts, childbirth was excruciating. The cries, the sweat, the sheer physical exertion were immense. You would be pushed to your absolute limits, every fiber of your being straining to bring forth new life. There was no escaping the fundamental reality of the process. The pain relief was more about coping mechanisms, about spiritual solace, and about the sheer force of will. It was a test of endurance, a trial by fire. And every successful birth was a testament not just to the power of the gods, but to the incredible resilience of the ancient Egyptian woman. It really makes you appreciate that little white pill, doesn't it? As you labored, guided by the midwife's seasoned hands and whispered incantations, the crucial moment would arrive, culminating in a unique and profoundly significant ritual, the birthing brick ceremony. This wasn't just a convenience, it was a deeply symbolic and practical aspect of ancient Egyptian childbirth, reflecting their ingenuity and spiritual beliefs. One mainstream historical fact about the birthing bricks is their widespread use. These weren't elaborate contraptions, but typically two simple mud brick supports, sometimes rectangular, sometimes conical, though surviving examples are rare due to their perishable nature. The laboring woman would squat or kneel over these bricks, which served to elevate her hips and provide support, allowing gravity to assist in the delivery. This ergonomic approach, remember, is something modern birthing practices have rediscovered as highly beneficial. Imagine the relief of having something solid to lean on, to push against. In the midst of such an intense physical exertion, these bricks were essentially the ancient equivalent of a sophisticated birthing chair, minus the cushioned comfort and adjustable settings. A quirky or fringe tidbit about the birthing bricks is that some surviving fragments, particularly from the New Kingdom, depict scenes of birth or protective deities like Bez or Taweret. While most would have been plain, the decorated ones suggest that these bricks were not merely utilitarian objects, but could also serve a ritualistic purpose, imbued with protective magic. Imagine looking down in your agony and seeing the fierce, yet comforting, face of Bess painted on the very brick supporting you. It's a strange blend of the mundane and the magical. Isn't it historians still argue whether the presence of such decorations on some bricks suggests a more ritualized use for specific individuals, perhaps royalty or high-status women, or if simpler, undecorated bricks were universally employed by the general populace for the same practical function. It makes you wonder if there was a luxury birthing brick market. 2. The act of giving birth onto or between these bricks was considered sacred. The ground beneath you, the very earth, was seen as a source of life and renewal. By squatting, you were not only using gravity to your advantage, but also symbolically connecting with the fertile earth. Drawing strength from it, the midwife would be positioned in front of you, ready to receive the baby. The moment the child emerged, it was a profound spiritual release, a testament to the power of creation and the benevolence of the gods. After the birth, the bricks themselves might have held further significance, while not explicitly detailed in every account. Some scholars suggest they could be kept as mementos or even reused for subsequent births. Carrying the positive energy of a successful delivery, they were humble objects, yet central to one of the most significant life events. The birthing brick ceremony encapsulates so much about ancient Egyptian beliefs, the practical application of knowledge, the deep reliance on divine protection, and the understanding that life itself was a fragile, sacred gift. You were literally grounded during this most ungrounding of experiences, a tangible link to the land that sustained them, and the gods who watched over them. It's a solid foundation for a new life. Quite literally, with the last monumental push. Your baby has finally emerged, tiny and vulnerable, into the harsh light of ancient Egypt. But the journey isn't over. Far from it. the immediate aftermath of childbirth. The postpartum care for the mother was just as crucial for survival as the birthing process itself. This period was fraught with its own dangers, from infection to hemorrhage, and while their understanding of modern germ theory was non-existent, ancient Egyptians had practical, if sometimes rudimentary, methods of care. One mainstream historical fact is the emphasis on rest and protection for the new mother. Immediately after birth, you would be incredibly weak, likely exhausted and in pain. The midwife and female relatives would ensure you had a clean space to recline, often on fresh linen or a mat. This wasn't just about comfort, it was about preventing further exertion that could lead to complications. You wouldn't be expected to jump up and resume your daily chores instead. There was a period of enforced rest. Recognizing the immense physical toll childbirth had taken, think of it as a very intense, forced bed rest. Without the Netflix, a quirky or fringe tidbit involves the use of specific oils, salves, or even fumigation for the new mother. While details are scarce, some texts suggest the application of aromatic oils or herbal paste to the perineal area, not just for soothing but also potentially for antiseptic purposes, however crude, given their knowledge of various plants and their medicinal properties. It's plausible they understood certain herbs had a cleansing or healing effect. You might also be subjected to a form of fumigation, where aromatic herbs were burned nearby, and the smoke was wafted over you, believed to purify the body and ward off evil spirits that were thought to target vulnerable individuals, especially after a major life event. Historians still argue whether the primary benefit of these fumigations was purely spiritual and protective, or if some of the herbs used had genuine antiseptic or calming properties. Providing a subtle medicinal effect, you're essentially getting a spiritual steam cleaning. Nutrition was also key. You would be given easily digestible foods, perhaps gruels or broths, to help regain your strength. There was also an understanding of the need for hydration. With clean water or herbal infusions readily available, the midwife would also likely perform checks for excessive bleeding, though their ability to intervene in cases of severe hemorrhage was, tragically, very limited. This was a critical point where many lives were lost. The postpartum period also had a strong spiritual component. Protective amulets, like those of Taweret or Bez, might be kept close to you, or protective incantations might be recited. The first few days, especially, were seen as a time of extreme vulnerability, a threshold where the veil between worlds was thin. The community rallied around the new mother, offering support and ensuring her needs were met, allowing her to focus solely on recovery and the initial bonding with her newborn. You were not alone in this recovery. Surrounded by the care of those who understood the immense journey you had just completed, it was a time of immense relief. Yes, but also of continued vigilance, knowing that the shadows of danger still lingered, with the mother safely, if exhaustedly, recovering. All attention would quickly turn to the tiny, squalling bundle now cradled in her arms. The initial moments and days of newborn care and naming were imbued with a mixture of practical necessity, deep affection, and profound spiritual significance. This fragile new life was a gift, but also a challenge, demanding immediate attention in a world where infant mortality was a stark, ever-present reality. One mainstream historical fact is that immediately after birth, the baby would be cleaned, often with water and soft linen, and checked for any obvious signs of distress. The cutting of the umbilical cord, though not explicitly detailed in every text, would have been performed by the midwife, likely using a sharp, clean implement, perhaps a flint blade or a bronze knife. While they didn't understand sterilization as we do, the importance of cleanliness, even if rudimentary, was recognized to prevent obvious infection. After cleaning, the baby would be swaddled tightly in soft linen cloths. This practice, common across many ancient cultures, was believed to provide warmth, security, and to help the limbs grow straight. Imagine your tiny baby, snugly wrapped, a little linen cocoon, utterly dependent on the care of those around them. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves the use of special salves or eye treatments for the newborn. Some ancient Egyptian medical texts hint at the application of substances like malachite, a copper ore, or galena lead sulfide to the baby's eyes, not just for protection against the harsh sun or flies, but also, perhaps, as an early form of antiseptic. While lead-based compounds are now known to be toxic, at the time, they were believed to have protective qualities, possibly due to their antimicrobial properties when applied externally, or simply as a ritualistic ward against the evil eye. Historians still argue whether the primary intention of these eye applications was purely prophylactic against infection, ritualistic protection, or a combination of both. Given the prevalence of eye ailments in ancient Egypt, it's a rather alarming thought, isn't it? Painting your baby's eyelids with lead but for them? It was likely an act of profound care. The naming of the child was a significant event, though it might not involve a formal ceremony immediately. Children were often named shortly after birth, sometimes after a grandparent, a god or goddess, or a particular circumstance of their birth. These names were not merely labels, they often carried meaning, reflecting hopes, aspirations, or even serving as a form of protection. For instance, names incorporating a deity's name, like Ramos born of Ra or Nefertari, the most beautiful one of Amun, were common. Invoking divine favor, you might also find endearing, more personal names, reflecting the joy of the family. The new mother would immediately begin breastfeeding, a crucial practice for the baby's survival and a natural form of bonding. For ancient Egyptians, breast milk was the undisputed best nutrition for infants, and wet nurses were only employed if the mother was unable to nurse. This initial period, seeing your child for the first time, holding them close, giving them a name, was a moment of immense relief and burgeoning love, a precious counterpoint to the terror of the birth itself. You've faced death and emerged with life, a tiny miracle now nestled against you, completely yours. It's a powerful moment, making all the earlier horrors seem, for a brief time, a little more bearable, with the initial relief of a successful birth fading. The stark realities of life in ancient Egypt began to assert themselves, particularly regarding the childhood health and mortality of your new baby. This was an era where life was fragile, medical knowledge limited, and environmental hazards abundant. For every joyous birth, there was the ever-present shadow of potential loss. One mainstream historical fact is the incredibly high rate of infant and child mortality in ancient Egypt. Archaeological evidence from cemeteries reveals that a significant proportion of burials were those of infants and young children. Estimates vary, but it's widely accepted that anywhere from 30% to 50% of children might not have survived past their 5th birthday. You lived with this grim reality, a constant undercurrent of anxiety beneath the love and hope for your child. It meant that every sniffle, every cough, every fever was a source of profound fear. A silent prayer whispered to the gods that this wasn't the one. Parents would invest deeply in their children, but they also lived with an acceptance, however heartbreaking, of the fragility of life. Imagine the constant worry, the fleeting moments of joy always tinged with the knowledge of how easily it could all be lost. A quirky or fringe tidbit concerns the use of certain remedies that, to modern sensibilities, seem utterly bizarre and potentially harmful. For instance, some ancient medical papyri mention concoctions for various childhood ailments that included ingredients like fly excrement, lizard blood, or even mashed up mice. These ingredients, while repulsive to us, were often used for their perceived magical or symbolic properties, or perhaps for very specific, unrecorded, folk understandings of their effects You might be asked to administer a spoonful of a foul-smelling paste to your feverish child, hoping against hope that this strange remedy would turn the tide. Historians still argue whether such remedies, despite their unappetizing components, sometimes contained trace elements or compounds that could have had minor therapeutic effects, or if their efficacy was purely psychosomatic. A desperate act of faith for parents? You can almost hear the ancient Egyptian mother sighing. Well, it looks like mouse mush, but the midwife said it's good for worms. Common ailments that plagued ancient Egyptian children included parasitic infections due to contaminated water and food, diarrheal diseases, respiratory infections, and a host of other conditions that are easily treated today but were often fatal then. The hot, dusty climate also contributed to eye infections. Malnutrition, even with a seemingly abundant Nile, was a risk, particularly after weaning, if a varied diet wasn't maintained. You would learn to read the subtle signs of illness, to recognize the dreaded symptoms, and to seek immediate, if often ineffective, intervention. Despite the grim statistics, parents loved their children fiercely. Inscriptions and tomb paintings often depict tender family scenes, showing parents doting on their offspring. They weren't callous about loss, they grieved deeply, as humans do. But their understanding of health and disease was fundamentally different. They relied on protective amulets, prayers to deities like Isis and Beis, and the traditional knowledge of midwives and healers. Every child who survived into adulthood was seen as a testament to divine favor and immense resilience. A precious life forged in the crucible of a challenging world. It makes you hug your own kids a little tighter, doesn't it? Assuming your child, defying the odds, survived the perilous first few years. The next major milestone in their young life was weaning and early education. This period marked a crucial transition from complete infant dependency to a more independent, albeit still guided, existence. It was a time of both developmental challenge and the first formal steps towards integrating into ancient Egyptian society. One mainstream historical fact is that children were typically breastfed for a surprisingly long period, often up to 2 or 3 years of age. This extended breastfeeding provided vital immunity and nutrition in an environment where other food sources could be contaminated or nutritionally deficient. The gradual introduction of solid foods would begin around 6 months. Perhaps soft gruels made from barley or wheat, mashed fruits, or softened vegetables. This slow transition was not just about dietary needs, but also about psychological readiness. Imagine, as a mother, the quiet intimacy of breastfeeding for so long, and then the slow, careful process of introducing new tastes and textures. It was a gentle letting go, piece by piece. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves the use of feeding cups with spouts, sometimes resembling a small animal or a breast. Found in archaeological digs, these fascinating artifacts suggest an intentional method of supplementary feeding or weaning, allowing liquid or semi-liquid foods to be given to infants without using a spoon, which could be messy or difficult for a very young child. Historians still argue whether these spouted vessels were used primarily for administering milk substitutes, herbal remedies, or early weaning foods, reflecting a practical solution to infant feeding challenges. It's an ancient baby bottle, essentially, but probably a lot harder to clean properly. You can almost hear the ancient Egyptian parents sighing. Oh, for a dishwasher, once weaned. Children became more fully integrated into the family and community life. Their education was largely informal at this early stage. Centered around observation and participation, boys would begin to learn the skills of their fathers: farming, craftsmanship, scribal work, or soldiering, by accompanying them and mimicking their actions. Girls would stay closer to home, learning domestic skills from their mothers: cooking, weaving, managing the household, and caring for younger siblings. This wasn't about classrooms and textbooks. It was about apprenticeship and practical experience. The ancient version of learning by doing, you wouldn't find them doing algebra, but they'd be mastering the complex art of bread making or the intricate knots for fishing nets. play was also an important part of early childhood. Archaeological discoveries have unearthed various toys, including dolls, miniature animal figures, spinning tops, and even simple board games. Children in ancient Egypt, despite the hardships, still experience the universal joy of play, developing social skills and imagination through their games. So, while life was undoubtedly tough, it wasn't all work and no play, even for the little ones. The weaning marked a shift from dependence to a more active role in the family unit, setting the stage for their future responsibilities within the rich tapestry of ancient Egyptian society. It was a gradual unfolding, a journey from vulnerability to budding competence, guided by the rhythms of the Nile and the traditions of their ancestors. Even as your child grew past infancy, the dangers were far from over. Childhood in ancient Egypt, as you're starting to understand, was a continuous battle against disease and misfortune. Childhood ailments and cures were a constant concern for parents, and their remedies often relied on a complex blend of herbal knowledge, magical incantations, and practices that, to our modern minds, seem utterly bizarre. You wouldn't call a pediatrician. Instead, you'd consult local healers, midwives, or even resort to household remedies. One mainstream historical fact is the prevalence of specific diseases that are still common today, but were far more devastating in ancient times. Intestinal parasites, like worms, were endemic due to poor sanitation and contaminated food and water. Malnutrition, even in a fertile land, led to deficiencies that weakened children's immune systems. Eye infections, exacerbated by the dusty environment and flies, were also rampant, often leading to blindness. You would see children with swollen bellies from parasites, eyes crusted over, or suffering from persistent coughs. It was a constant battle and often a losing one. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves some of the truly outlandish ingredients used in their medicinal concoctions. For example, the Ebers Papyrus, one of the most important ancient Egyptian medical texts, contains remedies for various ailments, for stomach problems or intestinal worms in children. Some prescriptions called for combinations of various herbs, but also sometimes included ingredients like mouse tails, lizard blood, or even pig teeth. Imagine trying to convince your child to ingest a paste made from ground-up pig teeth for a stomachache. The reasoning behind these specific ingredients is often lost to us, but it likely stemmed from a mixture of perceived magical properties, using parts of a strong animal and empirical observation. However flawed, historians still argue whether such ingredients were chosen for their actual pharmacological properties. Some animal parts do contain active compounds, their symbolic significance, or simply due to a lack of better options and a general kitchen sink approach to ancient medicine. It was a bit like a culinary experiment gone wrong, but with your child's health at stake. Beyond the more extreme remedies, more practical herbal medicines were also employed. Honey, known for its antiseptic properties, was often used for wounds or sore throats. Various plants were recognized for their anti-inflammatory or fever-reducing qualities, though their efficacy varied wildly for fevers. Cool compresses or attempts to induce sweating might be used. For skin ailments, soothing balms derived from plants were applied. However, the line between medicine and magic was often blurred. Many cures involved the recitation of spells, the wearing of protective amulets, or specific rituals believed to appease angry deities or ward off evil spirits thought to cause illness. You might find a child wearing a special charm around their neck, or have a healer perform a ritualistic cleansing. When modern medicine failed, which was often, they turned to the divine for intervention. It was a world where a stomachache wasn't just a stomachache. It could be the work of a malevolent spirit. Requiring both physical and spiritual intervention, you clung to every hope, every remedy, every prayer, praying your child would be one of the lucky few to overcome the myriad threats to their young life. Given the constant threat of illness and accident, it's no surprise that ancient Egyptian parents, much like parents everywhere, sought every possible means to safeguard their children. This often extended beyond practical care into the realm of the magical, leading to the widespread use of protective amulets and charms. These weren't mere trinkets, they were tangible expressions of hope, belief, and a desperate desire to shield the innocent from unseen dangers. One mainstream historical fact is the sheer variety and ubiquity of amulets found in archaeological contexts, particularly in child burials and domestic settings. Children were often buried with numerous amulets, and living children would wear them on necklaces, bracelets, or sewn into their clothing. These small objects, crafted from faience, carnelian, lapis lazuli, or even simple clay, represented various gods, sacred symbols, or animals. Each was believed to imbue the wearer with specific protections or qualities. Imagine dressing your child each morning, not just in their tunic, but carefully placing a string of beads, each one a silent prayer for their well-being. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves the specific types of amulets believed to protect against nocturnal threats or specific childhood vulnerabilities. For instance, amulets depicting Bez, the dwarf god, were incredibly popular. As we've discussed, his grotesque yet cheerful appearance was thought to scare away nightmares and evil spirits, particularly those that might cause harm to children while they slept. You might also find amulets shaped like the Tayat knot, often called the Knot of Isis, which symbolized protection and welfare, or the Shen ring, representing eternal protection. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of certain amulets, like those depicting specific creatures, reflects a prevalent fear of particular diseases or afflictions associated with those creatures, or if their symbolism was more generalized for good luck and protection against all harms. It's like having a whole protective squad, shrunk down to miniature, dangling around your neck. Other common protective amulets included the Ankh, the symbol of life. To ensure vitality, the Wadjet Eye or Eye of Horus. To ward off evil and provide healing, and various animal figures, crocodiles for instance, might represent the fierce protection of Sobek, or simply be a stylized representation of the dangers of the Nile that needed to be averted. Scorpions and snakes were also depicted, not necessarily to symbolize their danger, but to invoke protection against them, or to harness their venomous power defensively. You'd hope that a miniature stylized scorpion around your child's neck would send a clear message to any real scorpions. Don't even think about it. These amulets weren't just passive objects. They were often blessed by priests or imbued with magical incantations to enhance their power. Parents would place profound faith in them, believing that these small, inanimate objects could stand as a barrier between their beloved children and the countless dangers of their world. In a time before vaccines, antibiotics, and comprehensive medical knowledge, these charms offered a powerful psychological comfort, a visible shield against the terrifying unknown. They were a testament to the desperate love of a parent, willing to try anything and everything to keep their precious child safe in a world that offered so few guarantees. Given the high rates of child mortality we've discussed, a question naturally arises: how did ancient Egyptians conceive of the afterlife for children? This wasn't merely an abstract theological point, it was a deeply personal and heartbreaking reality for countless families. Their beliefs about death and the journey to the afterlife offered a framework for understanding and coping with the profound loss of a young life. One mainstream historical fact is that children, regardless of their age, were generally believed to enter the afterlife alongside adults. There wasn't a separate, lesser afterlife for them, nor were they excluded from the journey. Like adults, they were thought to undergo a transformation upon death, with their souls the Ba and Ka separating from the body and beginning their journey to the field of reeds. The Egyptian paradise. Archaeological evidence from child burials supports this, as many infants and children were interred with miniature versions of grave goods, small coffins, tiny amulets, and even modest offerings of food and drink. similar to those found in adult burials. Albeit scaled down, you'd prepare your child for this journey just as you would an adult. Perhaps even with greater tenderness, knowing they faced it so young. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves the idea that children, because of their innocence and purity, might have had a slightly easier or more direct path to the afterlife, while not explicitly stated as a dogma. Some interpretations of funerary texts suggest a compassionate view that spared them some of the more arduous trials of the underworld, such as the weighing of the heart ceremony that adults faced. The reasoning here was that a child had not yet accumulated the sins or transgressions of an adult life. Historians still argue whether this reflects a true theological exemption for children, or simply a comforting societal narrative born from the immense grief of child loss. It's a comforting thought. Isn't it that your child, taken too soon, wouldn't have to face the terrifying deities and judgments of the underworld, but might simply drift peacefully into the eternal sunshine of the field of reeds? The grief for a deceased child was undoubtedly immense and profound, as evidenced by heartfelt laments found in some ancient Egyptian poetry and letters. Parents would mourn deeply, and rituals would be performed to ensure the child's successful passage into the afterlife. Hoping for a reunion in eternity, they believed that by providing the necessary funerary rites and offerings, their child's spirit would find eternal peace and continue to exist. Just in another realm, you'd carefully wrap your child, place the tiny amulets around them, and whisper prayers for their journey, visualizing them playing happily in the land of the blessed. The concept of the eternal child in the afterlife might not have been fully fleshed out, but the underlying belief was that life continued. Regardless of age at death, children would retain their identity and be welcomed by the gods. For parents in ancient Egypt, this belief offered a measure of solace in the face of what was, for many, an inevitable tragedy. It provided a spiritual framework for processing unbearable loss, a glimmer of hope that their beloved little ones were not truly gone, but merely transformed, waiting in a better place. It makes you realize that the human heart, across millennia, grieves and hopes in remarkably similar ways. Even if the beliefs surrounding those emotions differ vastly, while ancient Egyptian texts and artistic depictions offer invaluable insights into their beliefs and practices, much of what we now understand about childbirth and childhood comes not from scrolls, but from the earth itself. Archaeological evidence of childbirth provides a tangible, often visceral, connection to the realities of life and death in the Nile Valley, allowing modern scholars to piece together a more complete picture. One mainstream historical fact is the discovery of actual birthing tools and objects. While specific instruments solely for childbirth are rare due to the perishable nature of many materials, we find evidence of tools that would have been used by midwives, such as flint blades for cutting the umbilical cord, or ceramic vessels that might have held water or herbal infusions during labor. More compellingly, fragments of birthing bricks have been unearthed at various sites, sometimes bearing worn indentations consistent with prolonged use, or even faint traces of protective deities. These humble mud brick pieces, often overlooked by early excavators, tell a powerful story of physical support and ritualistic practice during the most vulnerable of moments. Imagine touching a piece of clay that centuries ago supported a woman bringing new life into the world, a silent witness to countless struggles and triumphs. A quirky or fringe tidbit involves the study of ancient skeletal remains. Bioarchaeologists, by examining the bones of women, can sometimes identify markers of past pregnancies and childbirth. For instance, specific lesions or bone remodeling on the pubic bone known as Paris pitting or birthing scars can indicate previous childbirth. While this method is debated among scholars and not universally accepted as definitive proof of parturition, it offers a fascinating glimpse into the reproductive lives of ancient women, allowing us to estimate how many times a woman may have given birth. Historians still argue whether the presence or absence of these markers is a reliable indicator of parity, or if taphonomic processes and individual variations make them less conclusive. It's like forensics for fertility, allowing us to read the story of a life etched into bone. You realize that, even in death, the body holds secrets, whispering tales of joy and hardship from millennia past, beyond tools and bones. Domestic archaeology also provides clues. The layout of homes, the presence of specific cultic objects like bez or towerette figurines in household shrines, and even the wear patterns on certain floors can suggest areas where significant life events, including births, took place. The discovery of numerous child burials, particularly of infants, often near or within dwelling areas, paints a stark picture of the high mortality rates and the immediate personal nature of their grief. These weren't always elaborate tombs, sometimes. A simple pot burial under the house floor was the final resting place for a beloved, lost child, keeping them symbolically close through careful excavation and meticulous analysis. Archaeologists continue to unearth the silent stories of childbirth in ancient Egypt. Each fragment, each bone, each buried object contributes to our understanding of a reality that was simultaneously universal in its human experience and unique in its cultural practices. It's a testament to the enduring power of material culture to connect us across vast stretches of time, allowing us to witness, however indirectly, the ancient miracle of birth as we gently float back from the dusty, sun-baked landscape of ancient Egypt. You might find yourself reflecting on the enduring legacy of ancient birthing wisdom and the fascinating remnants of these ancient traditions. While their world was vastly different from our own, their struggles, their hopes, and their ingenuity echo through the millennia, offering surprising insights and a deeper appreciation for the journey of life. One mainstream historical fact that forms part of this legacy is the ancient Egyptian emphasis on upright birthing positions. We saw how they favored squatting or kneeling, often using birthing bricks or stools. Modern obstetrics, in many parts of the world, has revisited and increasingly advocates for these very same positions, recognizing their physiological benefits in harnessing gravity and widening the pelvic outlet. It's a powerful example of ancient knowledge, perhaps arrived at intuitively or through generations of observation, being validated by contemporary science. You realize that sometimes. The newest approaches are just old wisdom, rediscovered and rebranded. It's almost as if they looked at us, lying flat on our backs in hospital beds, and said, "What are you doing? Get up, let gravity do its job." A quirky or fringe tidbit is how some of their protective rituals and symbols, though stripped of their explicit religious context, subtly persist in various cultures. The idea of keeping a special object near a newborn for protection, or even certain lullabies and comforting gestures, might carry faint echoes of ancient apotropaic practices. Think of a baby blanket passed down through generations, or a specific piece of jewelry worn for good luck during pregnancy, while not directly invoking bez or towerette. The underlying human desire for protection and comfort during vulnerability remains. Historians still argue whether the continuity of certain folk practices surrounding childbirth in different cultures can be directly traced back to ancient Egyptian influences, or if they represent independent, universal human responses to the anxieties of birth. It's like a quiet whisper from the past, a faint memory of an older magic embedded in our modern rituals. The enduring legacy also lies in the human resilience we've witnessed, despite the profound dangers, the limited medical knowledge, and the ever-present threat of loss. Ancient Egyptian women continue to bring forth life. Their courage, supported by their community and their deep spiritual beliefs, is truly awe-inspiring. You might find yourself comparing your own comfortable existence to theirs, and feel a pang of gratitude for modern medicine, for hygiene, for the simple assurance of survival that we often take for granted. Finally, the archaeological evidence itself is a powerful legacy. Every unearthed birthing brick, every child's amulet, every skeletal indicator of past pregnancies speaks volumes. These aren't just dusty artifacts, they are direct connections to lives lived, struggles endured, and loves cherished. They allow us to walk, however briefly, in the footsteps of those who came before us, to understand their fears and their triumphs, the horrifying truth about childbirth in ancient Egypt. Far from being just a morbid curiosity, becomes a testament to the enduring human spirit, a narrative that reminds us of the profound journey of life. Then as now, end of script, sweet dreams.